right, so today we're going to be taking a deep dive into some symbolism in the Harry Potter universe, specifically the Deathly Hallows.
Oh, excellent choice. A lot to unpack there.
I know, right? It's one of those things I feel like every time I read the books or watch the movies,
Yeah.
something new kind of pops out at me.
Oh, for sure. And, they're not just magical objects, right?
No, no, not at all. I mean, that's part of what makes them so fascinating to me. Like, what do they actually represent?
Well, they symbolize some pretty deep human
Yeah,
desires.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Like conquering death,
Yeah.
immortality.
The allure of power. I mean, the Hallows really tap into those primal urges, don't they?
Yeah, it's almost like each Hallow kind of approaches this fear of death from like a different angle.
Right.
Like with the Elder Wand, it's almost like a brute force approach to immortality.
It is, yeah.
Hmm.
Like, dominate everyone, eliminate your enemies, and surely death can't touch you.
Right. Exactly. It's like if I'm powerful enough, I can just like push death away.
Yeah. And we see that same lust for power throughout history, don't we?
Yeah.
All those rulers and emperors seeking eternal life.
Yeah. Obsessed with controlling everything.
Totally. And then you have the Resurrection Stone, which, oh, that one gets me in the
Oh,
feels.
for sure. Like who hasn't wished they could bring back someone they've lost?
Mm.
Even just for a moment.
It speaks to that longing for connection, to defy loss. But as Harry finds out, clinging to the past through the stone, it doesn't really offer solace.
Yeah. It's almost like a hollow victory.
It is just
Yeah.
a painful reminder of what you can never truly get back.
Which is interesting because the invisibility cloak, in a way, offers a similar kind of escape, but it's a totally different vibe. It's
Hmm.
not about dominating death or even clinging to the past.
Yeah.
It's almost like slipping away unnoticed,
Hmm.
choosing to stay hidden rather than engaging in the struggle at all.
There's a humility to the cloak that you just don't see with the other Hallows.
Wow.
It doesn't need to be flashy.
No.
Or bend the world to its will. It's just quiet acceptance.
Like recognizing some things are just beyond our control.
Exactly. Like death.
And it's interesting, out of all the Hallows, it's the cloak that Harry chooses to keep. Not the power to conquer, not the ability to defy loss, but this, like, quiet protection.
It really makes you think about what that says about his character.
It does. And it kind of makes you think maybe chasing those huge promises of immortality, maybe that's not the answer.
No, maybe not. Especially when you look at the Elder Wand. That thing comes with a heavy price, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah. Every wizard who's tried to own that thing has met a pretty bad end. Antioch Peveril, Grindelwald, Voldemort,
It's a long and bloody history.
and they all fell into the same trap, right? Believing that power was the key to conquering death.
They thought if they were powerful enough, but it consumed them in the end, twisted their desires.
Which makes me think about what Dumbledore told Harry about the Elder Wand. Power seduces, he said, even the best of us.
Oof, that's a chilling line.
It is. It makes you realize that even with good intentions, anyone can be corrupted by that kind of power.
And that's the thing, right? The choices these Hallows represent, they go way beyond which one you'd want to possess. It's about understanding the temptations they embody and the consequences that come with them.
Right, like the Resurrection Stone. It preys on your deepest vulnerabilities,
That longing to undo loss.
to hold on to what's gone.
Yeah. And Harry learns the hard way that those resurrected figures, they're just shadows.
Yeah, they can't truly come back.
It's a harsh lesson in acceptance, isn't it?
It is. Like, true healing comes from letting go, embracing the natural cycle of life and death.
It's tough, but it's true.
And it brings us back to the cloak. That one seems to be the only Hallow that offers a path without that destructive potential.
Right. It's not about conquering or controlling. It's about accepting limitations. Choosing when to be seen and when to stay hidden.
It's almost a metaphor for, like, understanding your place in the world. Not trying to dominate or defy, but just
A
be.
lot of real wisdom in that.
Yeah. And, speaking of subtle things, what about the Deathly Hallows symbol itself? That triangle, the circle, and the line.
Yeah.
It's a cool design, but there's a lot more to it than that, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a visual representation of how these objects are connected, how their meanings intertwine.
Yeah, and there's so many layers to unpack there. On one hand, you could see it as representing the ultimate goal, right? Uniting the Hallows, achieving mastery over death.
It's definitely tempting to see it that way, especially when you consider how much emphasis the story puts on uniting them.
Right. But it's also important to remember that ambition is often portrayed as misguided, even dangerous.
Oh, totally. I mean, think about Grindelwald and Voldemort.
Yeah. Their quest to unite the Hallows, it led to nothing but destruction.
It did. So that makes you think, doesn't it? Is the symbol a promise, a warning, or maybe both?
Yeah. So the symbol itself has this tension built into it, the desire for power and immortality versus the potential for destruction and, well, the need to accept our limitations.
Absolutely, and that tension plays out throughout the entire story.
Which actually reminds me of something else, the Deathly Hallows symbol. It kind of looks like the Masonic square and compasses, right?
Mm.
It can't just be a coincidence, can it?
It is a curious connection.
Right.
And it does make you think about some deeper esoteric meanings behind the Hallows.
Right, because the square and compasses, they represent things like morality, spiritual enlightenment, the
Wow.
pursuit of knowledge.
Exactly.
So do you think maybe Rowling was intentionally drawing those parallels
Yeah.
between the wizarding world and these real-world esoteric traditions?
It's definitely possible. And it adds a whole other layer to the symbolism, doesn't it? Like, the significance of the Hallows goes beyond just the immediate story. It's tapping into something bigger.
Yeah, it's like peeling back layers of an onion. The more you look, the more you find.
Yeah.
And speaking of discovering new things, have you heard about this other interpretation of the Deathly Hallows symbol that's been going around?
Oh, fill me in. I always love to hear what fans come up with.
Well, this one sees the symbol not as power or immortality, but as a reminder of love, sacrifice, acceptance of mortality.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
Yeah. It's pretty cool, actually. Like, the triangle represents the three main characters, Harry, Ron, and Hermione.
Okay.
And the circle is their bond, the love and friendship that gets them through everything.
I like that.
And then the line, the Elder Wand, that symbolizes the sacrifices they make for each other, the dangers they face together, their unity.
It's a beautiful interpretation, isn't it?
It is. It really gets to the heart of the story because in the end, Harry's victory, it's not about conquering death. It's about love and sacrifice being stronger than evil.
Yeah. That's a message that goes way beyond just Harry Potter, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. It's about the human spirit, the strength we find in connection and compassion, accepting that we're mortal, but still cherishing the time we have.
Very well said.
We've covered a lot of ground already.
Oh, we have.
But before we move on, I just want to ask you, dear listener, something to think about.
Oh, good.
We've talked about the meaning of each hallow, their connection to real-world symbolism, the different interpretations of the whole symbol. But here's the big question. Do you think the Deathly Hallows should be united? Or is there real power in understanding each one individually and the choices they represent? Something to ponder as we keep going with our deep dive.
It really makes you think about what would happen if someone did unite all the Hallows, right?
Right. And I mean, we've mostly been focusing on like the negative side of things, the whole lust for power thing.
Yeah.
But like, what if someone with really good intentions had all three?
Okay. Yeah.
Someone like Dumbledore. Could they use them for good?
That's a great question. Imagine the possibilities.
Right.
The Elder Wand, but used with wisdom and compassion. It could actually be a force for peace.
Yeah, and like the Resurrection Stone, not for selfish reasons, but to comfort people who are grieving,
Oh, I like that.
help them find closure.
Yeah. A tool for healing.
Exactly. And I mean, with the cloak, we've already seen it used to protect people, keep them safe.
Right.
But even then, with good intentions, I still can't shake this feeling that the Hallows are just inherently kind of dangerous,
I know what I mean. It's like they tap into something deep inside us,
Yeah.
something that can easily be twisted.
Even Dumbledore, I mean, he was super wise and powerful, but even he admitted he was tempted by the Resurrection Stone.
Oh, yeah, he wanted to see his family again.
Exactly. It's a good reminder that anyone, no matter how good they are, can still be tempted by these things.
It's true.
So maybe Rowling's point is that the Hallows aren't just about power. They're like mirrors to our own weaknesses.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
The things we're afraid of, the things we long for.
Yeah.
And it's like a test. Can you resist these temptations? And honestly, a lot of people fail.
They do, yeah.
I mean, think about all the people who've been hurt or even killed because of the Hallows throughout history.
It's a long and tragic list.
It is, yeah.
Which kind of brings us back to this whole unity and division thing. We've talked about how wanting a specific Hallow can isolate you, make you obsessed.
Yeah.
But what about the impact on, like, the whole wizarding world?
Ooh, good point.
The whole quest to unite the Hallows, historically, that's caused a lot of conflict.
It's true. Wars have been fought over them.
Yeah. It pits people against each other, driven by greed and ambition.
It's almost like the Hallows themselves become a source of discord.
Yeah, a symbol of how divided the wizarding world really is.
Think about Grindelwald.
Mm-hmm.
All those wars he started, all those lives lost.
All for a power that ultimately corrupts you.
Exactly.
It just shows this tension we have as humans. Like, we want unity, we want everyone to get along.
Yeah.
But then there's this pull towards power and ambition.
And it's kind of like the Hallows themselves are a reflection of that.
Right. Remember all those interpretations of the symbol we talked about?
Yeah.
On the one hand, you have this promise of ultimate power.
Right. You could be like a god.
Yeah. But then there's also the warning, like, hey, be careful what you wish for.
Power corrupts.
Exactly. And then there's that fan interpretation.
Oh, yeah. The one about love and sacrifice.
Yeah. Maybe the real power of the Hallows isn't in their individual strength, but in how they represent friendship and community.
That's powerful.
It is, right. And it reminds us that even in a world obsessed with power and immortality, there are other ways to be.
Yeah. And maybe those other ways, even though they're not as flashy, are actually more meaningful.
Right. It's a really interesting contrast, and it makes you think about the legacy of the Deathly Hallows.
Yeah.
They are objects of power, but they're also symbols of what we want, what we're afraid of, and the choices we make.
And those choices are ultimately what define us, right?
Exactly. Not just as individuals, but as a whole society.
Do we give in to power? Or do we choose compassion and understanding?
And that's something we all have to think about, even outside of Harry Potter, right?
Oh, totally.
The Deathly Hallows are just made up, but they reflect real human impulses.
I mean, think about the Elder Wand.
Yeah.
How many wars have been started because people wanted that kind of power?
That's true. It's not just about wizards.
Right. And then the Resurrection Stone, it's like our desire to create a world without loss.
It is, like all the advancements in medicine, trying to live longer.
Yeah.
Even artificial intelligence.
It's all about pushing those boundaries.
Right. Can we overcome death?
And then the invisibility cloak.
What about that one?
Well, nowadays, everyone's worried about privacy, right?
True.
Wanting to be anonymous online, not being tracked all the time.
Yeah. It's like we want to be invisible in this hyper-connected world.
It's kind of amazing how these objects from a fantasy book can be so relevant to our lives.
It is. The Deathly Hallows, they're not just things, they're symbols of like the human condition.
Yeah, all of our hopes and fears and choices, all wrapped up into these three objects.
Exactly. And that's why they're so interesting to think about.
They help us understand ourselves better, and maybe even the world around us.
And maybe by thinking about them, we can figure out new ways to deal with those big questions.
Yeah, like how do we balance our ambitions with compassion? How do we find unity when everyone wants power? How do we accept that life ends?
Those are tough questions, but they're important ones.
They are, yeah.
And, I think that's the goal of any good deep dive, isn't it?
What's that?
To come away with new ideas, new perspectives, and a sense of wonder about the world. It's amazing how, even with magic, the most powerful stuff is still connected to, like, what we want as humans.
I know, right? Like those big questions about life and death and all that. The Deathly Hallows, I mean, they get right to the heart of that.
They do. And when you think about all three of them together, it's almost like they show us the different ways people react to those questions.
That's interesting.
Like a spectrum of responses.
Oh, I like that.
Spectrum. So on one end, you've got the Elder Wand.
Okay.
Pure power, right? The need to conquer, to control everything.
Yeah, like brute force.
Exactly.
If I'm powerful enough, death can't touch me.
Right. Like that's the answer right there.
Yeah.
But then on the other side, you have the cloak. And that's a completely different approach.
It is.
It's not about fighting death. It's about accepting that it's going to happen, stepping back from the fight.
Instead of charging right in.
Exactly. And there's a real wisdom in that, I think.
There is.
Knowing that some things, you just can't control them.
Yeah.
Sometimes the best thing you can do is like retreat, observe, find another way.
And then you have the Resurrection Stone right in the middle.
Right. And that one, that's about wanting to undo loss.
Yeah, like I can't accept that they're gone.
Exactly. Grief, love, wanting one more moment.
It's more emotional than the others.
It is.
Yeah.
But as Harry finds out, that path, it's dangerous.
It is. It's like a trick.
Yeah, a false promise.
You think you're getting comfort, but it just makes the pain worse.
Because real healing, it comes from letting go.
Moving on.
Yeah. Honoring the people you lost, but still living your life.
It's tough, but it's true.
It is. And what's fascinating is how these three things, power, acceptance, and wanting to fix loss, they're all kind of connected,
I do.
Like sometimes wanting power comes from being afraid to die.
Oh, that makes sense.
You try to control everything because you don't want to face the unknown,
Yeah.
or wanting someone back so much that you become obsessed
Yeah.
and it blinds you to everything else.
So you can't find peace.
Right.
And then the cloak, it's like, it's quiet, but it can also be powerful.
It can. It's about protecting yourself, the people you care about.
So it's like each hallow is a way of dealing with these big questions.
Right. About life and death.
But none of them give you a perfect answer.
No. And that's why the Deathly Hallows are so powerful.
I make you really think.
They do. They show us how complicated these questions are.
How we all deal with them differently.
And that there's no one right way to do it.
So it comes down to the choices we make.
Yes.
Why we make them.
And what happens because of them.
Okay, so back to the big question.
Should they be united? Right.
Or is it better to understand each one on its own?
Well, I mean, part of me thinks uniting the Hallows, wouldn't that be amazing?
It would be. To have that much control.
To be able to conquer death.
It's tempting.
It is.
But we've seen what happens when people try to do that.
Yeah, it doesn't end well.
It's a trap.
It's like the more you want that power, the more it destroys you.
But what if, instead of trying to own the Hallows, we saw them as like tools to learn from?
Okay, yeah.
To help us grow.
Hmm.
To understand these big questions better.
So instead of external power, it's about internal wisdom.
Right. Not conquering death, but embracing life.
Living it to the fullest. And maybe that's the real power of the Deathly Hallows.
Maybe it is.
It's not about uniting them physically, but uniting the different parts of ourselves.
Oh, that's good.
Like the Elder Wand, it's courage, facing your fears.
And the stone.
That's compassion.
Yeah.
Connecting with others. Healing from loss.
And the cloak.
Wisdom.
Accepting what you can't change.
It's about balance.
Yeah.
Understanding that all these things are connected.
And then choosing the right path.
The one that fits your values.
And it makes me think about that fan theory again.
The one about love and sacrifice.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
It is.
It reminds us that real strength isn't about beating death.
But about really living.
Yeah. Appreciating every moment.
Making the world a better place.
Because that's what really matters.
I think that's a great lesson to take away from all of this.
I agree. Even though the Deathly Hallows aren't real, they make us think about important things.
Yeah.
They help us understand ourselves.
And what's truly important. All right, so today we're going to be diving deep into the dark arts, exploring Voldemort and his rather unsettling quest for immortality. You've provided like a ton of Harry Potter books, so I'm guessing you're fascinated by this topic just like me.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's a fascinating subject.
So how Voldemort's choice of Horcruxes like reflect his character?
Yeah.
Before we like get into the nitty-gritty of each Horcrux,
Sure.
let's start with like the basics.
Yeah.
Why was Voldemort so obsessed with immortality in the first place?
Well, I think understanding Voldemort means understanding his profound fear of death.
Yeah.
It's almost as if he saw, like, death as a personal insult, you know, a weakness to be conquered.
And that fear kind of stems from his childhood, right? Abandoned at that bleak Muggle orphanage, never knowing his parents.
Precisely. His mother, a witch, died shortly after he was born, leaving him with this distorted perception of death and a longing for control that he never quite shook off.
It's like he saw his mother's death as a betrayal.
Right.
Like a failure of magic.
Yeah.
And when he finally discovered his magical heritage, it like fueled his desire to control everything.
Absolutely.
Even death itself.
Yeah, that's a great point. Discovering his magical lineage wasn't just a revelation, it was a confirmation of his exceptionalism. And I think it solidified his belief that he was different, destined for greatness, and therefore above the natural order of life and death.
So how do Horcruxes fit into all of this?
Yeah.
For those who haven't like quite brushed up on their dark magic.
Yeah.
What are Horcruxes exactly?
Sure.
And what makes them so dangerous?
Well, imagine your soul, right, as a whole, complete entity. Creating a Horcrux involves splitting your soul and hiding a fragment in an object, anchoring yourself to the world, even if your physical body is destroyed. But this act isn't a simple spell. It requires a level of magic so dark, so twisted, that it demands a terrible price. Murder.
So every time Voldemort created a Horcrux, he was essentially like diminishing his own soul, pushing himself further away from humanity.
Exactly. And that's where his obsession with immortality becomes truly chilling, I think. Each murder chips away at his soul, making him less human, less capable of empathy or remorse. He essentially traded his humanity for a twisted version of immortality.
Okay, that's messed up. So, knowing that creating a Horcrux requires murder, it makes his choice of objects even more, like, intriguing. He
Right.
could have hidden pieces of his soul in, like, random things. Why choose such specific, symbolic objects?
That's what makes this deep dive so interesting. These objects weren't chosen randomly. They were deliberate selections that reflect his values, his ambitions, and his deepest fears.
Like Slytherin's locket, for example. He could pick any, like, old heirloom, but
Yeah.
he chose this particular locket.
Yeah.
What was so special about it?
Well, Slytherin's locket represented everything Voldemort aspired to: power, pure blood supremacy, and dominance over the wizarding world. It was a symbol of his ambition to rule, to control, to establish a new order according to his twisted ideology.
So it wasn't just about, like, immortality.
Right.
It was about asserting his legacy,
Exactly.
ensuring his values lived on,
Yes.
even if his physical form didn't.
Precisely. By choosing these specific objects, he wasn't just trying to cheat death, he was trying to shape the world even in his absence.
This is where it gets really interesting, because some of his Horcruxes, like Tom Riddle's diary, seem almost, like, mundane compared to something like Slytherin's locket.
But the diary was anything but mundane for Voldemort.
Yeah.
It represented his cunning, his ability to manipulate and control others, even from beyond the grave.
Right.
Remember, he used that diary to try and possess Ginny Weasley, to exert his influence on a new generation.
That's right. It wasn't just an object. It was like a tool, a weapon, a way to ensure his ideology persisted.
Exactly.
So it wasn't just about, like, cheating death. It was about ensuring his ideas, his vision lived on.
Exactly. And that brings us to perhaps the most ironic Horcrux of them all, Harry Potter himself.
Oh, man. Talk about a plot twist. Voldemort accidentally turned Harry into a Horcrux when he tried to kill him as a baby.
And that, in many ways, was his ultimate undoing. By trying to destroy Harry, Voldemort inadvertently tethered himself to the very person who would eventually defeat him.
It's like his obsession with control backfired
Yeah.
spectacularly.
Yeah.
He was so focused on conquering death that he overlooked the power of, like, love.
Right.
The very thing that protected Harry and ultimately led to his downfall. But let's get back to those Horcruxes for a moment. I'm curious about the others.
We'll definitely explore those in detail. But before we move on, do you have any thoughts on the symbolism behind these first few choices? Any insights that strike you as particularly revealing about Voldemort's character?
Well, what strikes me is the sheer arrogance of it all. I mean, here's this guy so terrified of death that he's willing to murder, to split his own soul, to cling to existence in the most twisted way imaginable. But at the same time, he's so confident, so self-assured, that he believes he has the right to choose what lives on, what legacy he leaves behind.
Yeah.
It's like his fear and his ambition are feeding off each other, pushing him further and further into darkness.
That's a brilliant observation, and it's precisely that interplay of fear and ambition that makes Voldemort such a compelling, albeit terrifying, character. His choices, particularly with his Horcruxes, reveal a man driven by a desperate need for control, for legacy, for a twisted form of immortality that ultimately reflects his deep-seated insecurities.
I'm hooked. Let's dive deeper into those other Horcruxes and see what other secrets they reveal about Voldemort's character.
Let's do it. So let's unravel the mysteries behind those remaining Horcruxes. You provided quite a few books for this deep dive, and there are a couple of objects that I think are particularly revealing about Voldemort's character.
I'm all ears. We've talked about Slytherin's locket and Tom Riddle's diary, but what about, like, the others? What about Ravenclaw's diadem? That one always struck me as an odd choice.
It does seem like a curious selection at first.
Yeah.
After all, Ravenclaw's diadem represents wisdom, intelligence, and learning qualities that Voldemort often dismissed as inferior to raw power.
Exactly. He always seemed more interested in, like, brute force than book smarts. Why choose an object associated with intelligence?
I think this choice speaks volumes about his insecurity.
Okay.
While he craved power above all else, he couldn't entirely escape the allure of knowledge. Perhaps deep down he envied those who possessed true wisdom, those who excelled in the very areas where he felt inadequate.
So by taking Ravenclaw's diadem, he was trying to possess not just, like, power, but also the intellectual prowess he secretly craved.
Yeah,
It's almost as if he was trying to overcompensate for his, like, perceived shortcoming.
precisely. And it's this underlying insecurity, I think, that drives many of his actions. He seeks control and dominance not just because he desires power, but because he's desperately trying to quell those nagging doubts about his own worthiness.
That makes a lot of sense, and it explains why he surrounded himself with followers who, like, praised his every move,
Oh, yeah.
creating an echo chamber where his insecurities could be, like, temporarily silenced.
Absolutely. But let's not forget about Hufflepuff's cup.
Right?
This object represents loyalty, fair play, and hard work qualities that Voldemort utterly despised.
Okay, that one really throws me for a loop.
Yeah.
He saw Hufflepuff and its values as, like, weaknesses.
Right.
Why on earth would he choose that cup as a Horcrux? It seems, like, completely counterintuitive.
This choice, I believe, reveals his profound fear of vulnerability.
Okay.
Hufflepuff valued those who were kind, compassionate, and willing to work together, traits that Voldemort lacked and perhaps even feared.
So by taking Hufflepuff's cup, was he trying to conquer those very qualities that represented his, like, greatest weaknesses?
I think so, yeah.
It's like he was trying to control the things he couldn't understand or embody.
That's a brilliant insight. By possessing a symbol of those qualities, he was attempting to exert control over the very things that made him feel vulnerable. It was a futile attempt to subdue the parts of himself that he deemed unacceptable.
This deep dive is, like, really making me rethink everything I thought I knew about
Yeah.
Voldemort.
Yeah.
His choices, especially with his Horcruxes, weren't just about, like, immortality. They were about grappling with his own internal demons,
Absolutely.
his fears and his insecurities.
Precisely. And it's those internal struggles that ultimately shape his destiny. He saw immortality not just to escape death, but to escape those parts of himself that he couldn't reconcile with his pursuit of power.
It's almost tragic in a way. He was so consumed by his fear and ambition that he lost sight of what truly mattered: connection, empathy, and the acceptance of his own vulnerability.
Indeed. And speaking of connection, there's one more Horcrux we need to discuss, Nagini, the snake. She stands out from the others because she's a living creature, not an object.
That's right. Why choose a snake?
Yeah.
And why make her a Horcrux?
Well, snakes, especially in mythology and literature, are often associated with cunning, danger, and secrecy traits that Voldemort certainly embodied. But I think there's more to it than that. He could speak Parseltongue, a rare ability that allowed him to communicate with snakes. And it's possible that he saw in Nagini a kindred spirit, a creature that understood his isolation and shared his disregard for human life.
Like he found solace in a creature that reflected his own, like, coldness.
Yeah.
His detachment from human emotions.
Exactly. By making Nagini a Horcrux, he wasn't just choosing a powerful creature. He was forging a bond with a being that embodied his darkest impulses.
This brings up a fascinating question.
Yeah.
Did he view her as a pet, a companion, or something, like, more sinister?
That's a question worth pondering.
Yeah.
Their connection was certainly deeper than that of a typical wizard and their familiar. Perhaps he saw in Nagini a reflection of himself, a reminder of his own serpentine nature, both literally and figuratively.
It adds a whole new layer of complexity to the relationship. But let's not forget that even Nagini, despite her connection to Voldemort, ultimately played a role in his demise.
You're absolutely right, and that's what we'll explore in our final segment. How did these Horcruxes, meant to safeguard his immortality, ultimately contribute to his downfall?
Okay, so we've explored the symbolism behind Voldemort's Horcruxes, and it's clear they weren't just, like, random objects. They represent his deepest desires, fears, and his twisted approach to immortality. But here's the million galleon question: if these Horcruxes were supposed to make him, like, invincible, how did they ultimately lead to his downfall?
It's a fascinating paradox, isn't it? The very things he created to protect himself, to ensure his survival, became his greatest weakness.
I guess that's what happens when you dabble in dark magic and try to cheat death, right?
Yeah.
But I'm still curious, how did those Horcruxes actually contribute to his demise? Was it just, like, having to protect so many objects?
Partly, yes. The need to safeguard these objects forced him to make like strategic errors, to
Mhm.
rely on others, and to reveal his vulnerabilities. Remember how he entrusted Lucius Malfoy with the diary, hoping to use it to reopen the Chamber of Secrets?
Oh, right. And that backfired spectacularly when Harry destroyed the diary, unknowingly destroying a part of Voldemort's soul in the process.
Exactly. And this pattern repeats itself throughout the series. His obsession with protecting his Horcruxes blinds him to other threats, leading him to make reckless decisions.
It's like that saying, the only thing to fear is fear itself.
Right.
His fear of death, of vulnerability, drove him to create these Horcruxes, but that same fear ultimately clouded his judgment and led to his destruction.
That's a powerful insight, but there's another, even more profound way in which the Horcruxes contribute to his downfall. Remember how each murder, each act of splitting his soul chipped away at his humanity?
Yeah, we talked about how it made him less human, less capable of empathy and remorse.
Precisely. And that dehumanization, that erosion of his soul ultimately made him vulnerable. It's the very qualities he discarded, love, compassion, connection, that proved to be his undoing.
You mean like Harry's love for his friends, his willingness to sacrifice himself? Those were the things Voldemort could never understand, never weaponize.
Exactly. He saw those qualities as weaknesses, but they were, in fact, the source of true strength, the very things that allowed Harry to defeat him.
So it's not just the logistical burden of protecting those Horcruxes that brought him down. It was the spiritual cost, the gradual erosion of his humanity that made him vulnerable to the very forces he underestimated.
That's a brilliant way to put it. He sought immortality through division, through the fracturing of his own soul. But true immortality, true power lies in unity and connection and the very things he rejected.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener.
Yeah, me too.
It's made me realize that Voldemort's story isn't just about good versus evil. It's about the choice we make, the things we value, and how those choices ultimately shape our destiny.
Well said. And it reminds us that true strength lies not in conquering death, but in embracing life
Hmm.
in all its messy, complicated glory.
So to wrap this up, Voldemort's quest for immortality wasn't just about living forever. It was about control, about denying his own vulnerability, and ultimately about his inability to understand the power of human connection. His Horcruxes, those objects, and that creature he so carefully chose reflected his deepest fears and ambitions, but they also became the instruments of his downfall. He tried to cheat death, but in doing so, he lost sight of what it truly meant to live.
A fascinating exploration indeed. And as always, it leaves us with much to ponder. If Voldemort had chosen a different path, one based on compassion and connection rather than fear and isolation, could he have found a different kind of immortality, one rooted in love and legacy rather than power and control?
That's a question worth pondering. Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always up for a good deep dive, especially one that delves into the ethics of magic.
Today's topic is a fascinating one. We're exploring the Pensieve from the Harry Potter universe. You know, that magical basin where you can store and view memories?
Ah, yes. Dumbledore's Pensieve. Quite the intriguing device, isn't it?
It is. But it also raises a big question. Is it actually ethical to peek into someone else's memories, even if it's magic?
That's where things get tricky. It's almost like we need a moral compass for magic, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. So let's fire up our ethical engines and dive right in. Let's start with the obvious. The Pensieve seems like a pretty big invasion privacy, right?
Oh, without a doubt. Think about it. Your memories, your thoughts, your feelings, those are deeply personal. Wouldn't you agree?
Completely. It's like that moment in Goblet of Fire when Sirius Black is worried about Snape having access to Harry's thoughts through the Pensieve.
Right. It makes you think about the whole concept of mental privacy. Is it as crucial as physical privacy? I mean, in the real world, we have laws to protect our physical space, but what about our minds?
Exactly. It's like your mind should be your own private sanctuary, and having someone rummage through it without your permission, that's a violation, isn't it?
Absolutely. Like having someone read your diary or eavesdrop on your private conversations. Just imagine someone knowing your deepest fears, your secret hopes, your embarrassing moments, all without your consent.
Don't even get me started on those. I'd need a Pensieve just to erase all those awkward memories. But jokes aside, remember that ministry official who needed a memory charm like 10 times a day in Goblet of Fire?
Oh, right. The one who is constantly leaking secrets. A walking, talking security breach.
Precisely. It makes you think, what if instead of just modifying those memories, they were extracted and viewed without consent? The ethical implications are huge.
You hit the nail on the head there. Consent is absolutely crucial when it comes to something as personal as memories. Now, Dumbledore often used the Pensieve with Harry's knowledge, but he was a figure Harry trusted, a mentor.
True, true. But imagine a world where anyone could access your memories without your permission, whether it's a jealous ex, a nosy neighbor, or even the government. That's a pretty scary thought, right?
It's downright terrifying, and not just ethically, but legally as well. Accessing someone's memories without their consent, regardless of your intentions, that's a massive violation of their autonomy.
You're completely right. It's like you're robbing someone of their right to control their own narrative, their own story.
And let's not forget, memories aren't always reliable. They're not objective recordings of events. They're filtered through our perceptions, our emotions, our biases.
Oh, absolutely. Like when Snape misinterprets Harry's dreams about Voldemort in Order of the Phoenix. He assumes Harry enjoys them, but that's so far from the truth.
Exactly. It highlights how easily memories can be misinterpreted, even by someone who knows us well. We tend to see what we want to see, don't we?
We do. It's like putting on those rose-tinted glasses, even when looking back at our own past. But when it comes to judging someone based on their memories, especially through a Pensieve, it gets even trickier.
Oh, without a doubt. Because you never know how time, emotions, even simple biases might have colored those recollections.
It's like trying to piece together a puzzle with missing pieces and faded colors. You might get the general picture, but you'll never have the complete and unvarnished truth.
And judging someone based on that incomplete picture, that feels wrong on so many levels.
It does. It's like judging a book by its cover without ever reading the story inside.
And then there's the potential damage to relationships. Imagine uncovering secrets, hidden resentments, past hurts, all those things we keep tucked away for a reason.
It's like Snape's worst memory in Order of the Phoenix, when James Potter humiliates him. That scene was heart-wrenching, and it definitely impacted his relationship with Harry.
Exactly. It makes you wonder, would this kind of unfiltered access to memories ultimately do more harm than good?
It's like that saying, curiosity killed the cat. Sometimes what we don't know might actually be better for us, especially when it comes to relationships.
That's a great point. It's all about that delicate balance between trust and privacy.
It is. And it makes me think about how easily that balance could be shattered if something like a Pensieve were to fall into the wrong hands.
Oh, absolutely. But let's not forget, the Pensieve does have the potential for good as well. Remember how Dumbledore used it to piece together events, to understand motivations, to learn from past mistakes?
That's true. He used it to understand Voldemort, to strategize against him, to ultimately protect a wizarding world. There's definitely a positive side to this powerful tool.
Right, and maybe that's the key here, figuring out how to harness the power of the Pensieve for good while acknowledging and mitigating the risks.
Absolutely. It's a tricky balancing act, but it's a conversation worth having, especially as technology continues to advance in our own non-magical world.
You know, it's funny you mentioned that because while the Pensieve might be fictional, the ethical dilemmas it raises are becoming increasingly relevant in our own lives.
You're right. We're seeing advancements in neuroscience, artificial intelligence, things that could potentially make accessing memories a reality in the future.
It's like science fiction is merging with reality right before our eyes.
It is, and with that comes a whole new set of ethical considerations we can't ignore. But hey, maybe that's a topic for another deep dive.
Perhaps. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We still have a lot to unpack with the Pensieve, particularly its potential for good.
Exactly. And you know what? That's a perfect segue into our next discussion. So let's shift gears for a moment and explore how the Pensieve could revolutionize education, if used ethically and responsibly, of course.
Just imagine history class, right?
Mm.
Instead of just reading about, let's say, the signing of the Magna Carta, students could actually experience it through the Pensieve.
Whoa, yeah.
Yeah.
Like they could be right there in the room, feeling the tension, witnessing the debate, hearing the quills scratching on parchment.
Exactly. It wouldn't just be about memorizing dates and names anymore. They could truly grasp the significance of that moment in history, understand the motivations of the people involved.
And not just history, right? Think about science. Imagine experiencing a scientific breakthrough, like the discovery of penicillin, through the eyes of Alexander Fleming himself.
Oh, that's a great one. Or how about literature? Students could step into the mind of Shakespeare as he's writing Hamlet, feel the creative energy flowing, wrestle with those iconic lines.
It would be like unlocking a whole new dimension of learning, wouldn't it? Suddenly, these historical figures, these scientific giants, these literary masters wouldn't just be names in a textbook. They'd be real people with real emotions and motivations.
It would completely transform education. It would make learning so much more engaging, impactful, and profoundly personal.
It would, wouldn't it? But of course, we can't just hand over a pensive to every student and say, go wild. There would have to be some serious ethical guidelines in place.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking about people's memories here, their personal experiences. It's not something to be taken lightly.
Exactly. We'd need to think carefully about who would have access to this technology, what kind of memories would be considered appropriate for viewing, and of course, how to obtain informed consent from anyone whose memories are being accessed.
Consent is key, that's for sure. But even then, there's the question of potential harm. Some memories, especially traumatic ones, might be incredibly painful to revisit.
Yeah, that's a really important point. It's not just about the potential harm to the person whose memories are being viewed, but also to the viewer themselves. Imagine the emotional toll it could take, reliving someone else's trauma, even with their consent.
Exactly. It's a lot to consider. But, we've been talking about the implications of viewing other people's memories. What about accessing our own? Would that be any less ethically complex?
Hmm, that's an interesting question. You'd think it would be more straightforward, right? I mean, it's your own mind, your own memories.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But even then, there are potential pitfalls. Think about the psychological impact of reliving certain memories, especially those associated with trauma or deep regret.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. It's like, what if the pensive became a tool for self-flagellation, for constantly reliving past mistakes and amplifying feelings of guilt or shame?
Exactly. And then there's the issue of self-deception. We often edit our memories over time, don't we? We highlight the good, downplay the bad, maybe even completely block out certain experiences altogether.
It's like we all have our own personal spin doctors working overtime in our minds, shaping our narratives to fit the image we want to project.
Precisely. So even when using the pensive on ourselves, there's a risk of reinforcing those self-deceptions, of getting further away from the truth rather than closer to it.
It's like instead of gaining clarity, you're just adding another layer of distortion to your already biased memories.
Exactly. It's a slippery slope. And it highlights the need for caution, even when we're exploring our own minds.
It does, doesn't it? It's like the pensive is this powerful tool that can unlock incredible insights, but it can also be a source of distortion and even harm if not used carefully and responsibly.
You're absolutely right. And this brings us back to a point we touched on earlier, the importance of approaching the pensive and really any technology that gives us access to memories with a healthy dose of skepticism and critical thinking.
We can't just blindly accept everything we see as the objective truth, can we? We need to consider the source of the memory, the context in which it was formed, and the potential biases that might be shaping it.
Exactly. And even then, there's no guarantee of getting the complete and unbiased story. Memories are subjective, fluid, and constantly being reshaped by our experiences and interpretations.
So in a way, the pensive challenges us to confront the very nature of memory itself, doesn't it? It forces us to question the idea of a singular, objective truth, and to acknowledge the inherent subjectivity of our experiences.
You've hit the nail on the head there. It's a fascinating paradox, isn't it? The pensive gives us this incredible ability to revisit the past, but it also reminds us that the past is never truly fixed or knowable.
And you know what? This conversation about the pensive, it's not just about a magical device from a fantasy world, is it? It has some pretty real-world implications, especially with all the advancements in technology these days.
Oh, absolutely. It's like the pensive is holding up a mirror to our own world and forcing us to ask some tough questions about the future of technology and its impact on our lives.
It is. Think about all the advancements in neuroscience, artificial intelligence, those brain-computer interfaces we hear about. What if accessing memories becomes a reality in our lifetime?
It's mind-boggling, isn't it? And a little bit terrifying, to be honest. The ethical dilemmas we're discussing, they're not just hypothetical anymore. They're becoming increasingly relevant to the world we live in.
They are. And it makes me wonder, are we ready for a future where our memories, those most personal and private aspects of ourselves, could potentially be accessed and manipulated by technology.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's a question we need to be grappling with right now before it's too late.
Absolutely. We need to start thinking about the boundaries we want to set, the regulations we need to put in place, and the values we want to prioritize as these technologies continue to develop.
We need to be proactive, not reactive. We need to have these tough conversations about ethics, privacy, and the potential consequences of unchecked technological advancement.
Because the choices we make today, they're going to have a ripple effect on the future. And it's not just about protecting ourselves, it's about protecting the generations that come after us.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And you know what? While we ponder those big, weighty questions about the future, why don't we shift gears one last time and pose a final, thought-provoking question to our listeners? If you were given the opportunity to use a Pensieve, would you?
It's a question that's both exciting and kind of scary, right?
Right.
Like, who wouldn't want to relive their best memories, or maybe even peek into someone else's past?
Oh, the temptation would be huge, wouldn't it? But as we've been saying, the Pensieve isn't just a fun little magical gadget. There are serious ethical considerations here.
Yeah, it's like, sure, you could unlock amazing memories, but you could also open up a whole can of worms. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
like that age-old saying, curiosity killed the cat. So if you had that Pensieve in front of you, what would be your ground rules?
Well, for me, consent would be non-negotiable. No way would I even think about looking at someone's memories without their clear permission.
Couldn't agree more. Consent is absolutely the foundation here. But even with consent, there's the issue of potential harm. What if those memories bring up painful emotions or reopen old wounds?
Right. It's not just about protecting the person whose memories we're accessing. It's also about understanding the impact it could have on us, the viewer.
Exactly. And, something else to think about. Are we being honest with ourselves about our own motivations? Are we going into this with an open mind, or are we trying to confirm our own biases?
Ooh, that's a good one. It's so easy to fall into that trap, isn't it? Like, we might think we're being objective, but deep down, we're looking for evidence to support what we already believe.
Exactly. The Pensieve could be an amazing tool for empathy and understanding, but it also has the potential to be misused to reinforce our own prejudices.
It's almost like even with good intentions, it'd be a constant struggle to stay objective, wouldn't it?
It would. It's interesting that even Dumbledore, with all his wisdom, seemed to struggle with this sometimes.
That's true. He used the Pensieve to guide Harry, to help him understand the fight against Voldemort, but there were definitely times when he was, well, maybe a little manipulative.
You're right. And it reminds us that even the most well-intentioned people can be influenced by their own biases. It's a good reminder for all of us to check ourselves before we wreck ourselves, so to speak.
Wise words. It's like the Pensieve might seem simple at first glance,
Yeah.
but the more you think about it, the more complex it gets.
It really does. It's like a microcosm of the human experience, isn't it? It shows our capacity for both good and bad, our desire to understand and our struggle to deal with the past.
You know, what's fascinating to me is that this conversation about a magical object from Harry Potter is actually so relevant to our lives right
Oh,
now.
no, totally. It's almost like the Pensieve is a metaphor for the technology we're developing today. Our lives are so documented, so digital.
Exactly. Think about all the data we generate, the online trails we leave, the way our movements are tracked. It's not crazy to think that accessing memories, or at least the digital remnants of them, could become a reality.
It's both exciting and a little scary, isn't it? The
Oh.
potential is huge, but so are the risks.
Definitely. It all comes down to the choices we make, doesn't it? As individuals, as a society, as the people who create and use this technology.
That's it. Are we going to use these advancements to create a better world, or are we going to head down a dangerous path?
Those are big questions, and honestly, there are no easy answers. But having these conversations, thinking critically about the ethical implications, that's a good place to start.
Couldn't agree more. We need to be having these conversations now, before it's too late. It's about protecting our privacy, our freedom, our very humanity.
Well said. And that's why this deep dive into the Pensieve has been so important. It's a fictional device, but the questions it raises are very real.
They are. It's a reminder that even in a world of magic, ethics matter. And in our own rapidly changing world, they matter more than ever.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we leave you with this. The past is always with us, shaping our present and influencing our future. Even without a Pensieve, it's up to us to learn from it, to honor it, and to use its lessons to build a better world. Thanks for joining us on this journey.